Welcome to Mr. Cozy Bedtime True Crime Stories. Tonight, we're diving into 3 hours of gripping true crime cases. Real stories of mystery, betrayal, and cold-blooded crimes, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's the perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. Story 1. February 14th, 2020, dawned cold and clear in Fort Valley, Georgia, a small city in the heart of the state known for its peach orchards and its historic university. Valentine's Day should have been a day of romance and celebration, but for 23-year-old Anitra Lachey Gunn, a senior at Fort Valley State University, it would become the last day of her life. Anitra was a young woman on the cusp of her future. She was months away from graduating with her degree, balancing her studies with a part-time job as a server at the 1836 restaurant and lounge on West Church Street. Her father, Christopher Gunn, who lived in Atlanta, had tried to reach her that morning to wish her a happy Valentine's Day, to share a moment of connection on a day meant for expressing love. The phone rang, but there was no answer. At first, the silence might not have seemed unusual. Anitra was a busy young woman, juggling classes, work, and the complex demands of her personal life. But as the hours stretched on and calls went unanswered, concern began to grow. Christopher tried again and again, but his daughter never picked up. Something was wrong. That evening, Anitra's friends began receiving strange text messages from her phone. The messages didn't sound like her. They were odd, disconnected, asking questions that made no sense coming from someone they knew well. One message went to a man named David Scott Howard, known to everyone as Scoot, a 21-year-old barber who worked across the street from the restaurant where Anitra served tables. Scoot and Anitra had been close, sharing what he would later describe as an intimate connection in the days before her disappearance. The message he received claimed to be breaking up with him, though they weren't officially dating. It asked where he lived, questions that seemed strange and out of character. The messages continued through the evening, but they weren't coming from Anitra. By then, she was already dead, her body hidden in the woods of Crawford County, and someone else was using her phone, sending messages to cover tracks and create confusion. When Anitra's father couldn't reach her by February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, his concern turned to alarm. He drove from Atlanta to Fort Valley, his heart heavy with worry, hoping to find his daughter safe but fearing the worst. What he found instead was Anitra's car, a Chevrolet Cruze, visibly damaged and abandoned. But there was no sign of Anitra herself. The Fort Valley Police Department immediately began an investigation. They checked Anitra's home on West Church Street, looking for any signs of a struggle or forced entry. The apartment was quiet, undisturbed. Nothing suggested violence had occurred there. But Anitra was nowhere to be found, and her damaged car told a story of something terrible having happened. A task force was quickly assembled, bringing together officers from multiple agencies to search for the missing college student. The Peach County Sheriff's Office, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and local police worked together, following every lead, interviewing friends and family, trying to piece together Anitra's last known movements. The sheriff made a promise to the community and to Anitra's family. No stone would be left unturned in the search for her. Investigators learned that Anitra had last been seen on the morning of Valentine's Day at a house on Chestnut Hill Road in Fort Valley. The home belonged to Sherry Tolbert, the aunt of DeMarcus Little, Anitra's boyfriend. Witnesses reported seeing Anitra and DeMarcus together at a Waffle House at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 14th. After that early breakfast, they had gone to his aunt's house, where DeMarcus's friend Jivon Abram had also spent the night. But what happened after that morning remained a mystery. DeMarcus told investigators that Anitra had left his aunt's house fully dressed and alive, that she had driven away in her car. Yet her phone had gone silent. Strange messages had been sent from it, and her car had been found damaged and abandoned. None of it made sense if she had simply driven away as he claimed. 4 days after Anitra vanished, on the rainy morning of February 18th, Lieutenant Brian Stewart from the Peach County Sheriff's Office drove out to 420 Chestnut Hill Road, the address of Sherry Tolbert's home. He wanted to speak with Tolbert, to ask more questions about what had happened that Valentine's Day morning. But she wasn't home. Standing outside the house in the rain, Stewart had a feeling, an instinct born from years of police work. If Anitra had been harmed in that house, he thought, her body wouldn't be far. He got back in his patrol car and began to drive slowly through the surrounding area searching. He followed Chestnut Hill Road to Woolfolk Road, then to Tanglewood Road, his eyes scanning the peach orchards and farms that stretched across the landscape. Then he turned onto Greer Road, and something caught his attention. There was a path through the trees, and it looked like a car had recently driven through it, crushing vegetation and leaving marks in the soft earth. Stewart drove about 100 yards down the path, then got out of his car and walked another 100 yards deeper into the woods. That's when he saw it, a plastic wheel well tire skirt, the kind that protects the underside of a car. He bent down and found a part number on the piece of plastic. Using his phone, he Googled it. The part came back as belonging to a Chevrolet Cruze. At that moment, Lieutenant Stewart knew he had found where Anitra Gunn's body was. He looked around more carefully, noticing a notch on a nearby tree, the kind of damage that would be caused by a car scraping against it. And then, almost simultaneously, he saw her. Anitra lay in the woods, partially covered with branches. She was barefoot, wearing denim shorts, her shirt pulled up. Her limbs were pale, her arms nearly crossed. The scene was heartbreaking and horrifying. This young woman, who had been full of life and dreams just days earlier, was now gone, discarded in the woods like something disposable. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was called immediately. The site was secured, photographs were taken, evidence was carefully collected. On February 20th, an autopsy was completed at the GBI Medical Examiner's office in Macon. The results confirmed what everyone already feared. Anitra's death was a homicide. Dr. Andrew Koopmeiners, an associate medical examiner for the GBI, determined that the 23-year-old had died by manual strangulation, either from hands or an arm wrapped around her neck. As investigators dug deeper into Anitra's life and her relationship with DeMarcus Little, a disturbing pattern emerged. This was not a healthy relationship. It was one marked by jealousy, manipulation, threats, and violence. Text messages between Anitra and DeMarcus, recovered from their phones, painted a picture of a relationship that had been troubled from the start. By September 2019, just months after they had begun dating, Anitra was confiding to friends that she felt manipulated, that the relationship left her feeling drained rather than supported. In November, she had sent DeMarcus a message telling him plainly that she thought they should stop speaking, that every time they talked, she felt manipulated. But DeMarcus wouldn't let go. When Anitra tried to create distance, he would pull her back in with threats and emotional manipulation. He threatened to harm himself, telling her it would be her fault if he did. He accused her repeatedly of being with other men, of playing games with his emotions. His messages oscillated between professions of love and threats of violence. In one particularly chilling exchange, DeMarcus had offered someone $200 to harm a man he believed Anitra was seeing. He told Anitra they were going to have problems if she went out with this other man. At times, he threatened her life directly, stating that his mercy had limits. The text messages alone were damning evidence of a relationship built on control and fear. But there was more. On February 5th, 2020, just 9 days before Anitra disappeared, Fort Valley police had responded to a call at her home. Someone had slashed all 4 tires on her Chevrolet Cruze and thrown a brick through the back window of her apartment. DeMarcus Little was arrested and charged with criminal damage to property for those acts of vandalism. Even after being arrested for destroying her property, even after Anitra had made it clear she wanted distance from him, DeMarcus continued to pursue her. Friends later testified that Anitra felt trapped, that she had tried to leave the relationship, but DeMarcus always found a way back into her life. DeMarcus Little quickly became the primary suspect in Anitra's murder. He had been the last person known to see her alive. His aunt's house was where Anitra had last been seen, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Investigators obtained DeMarcus's phone and extracted all of its data. The GPS location data from his phone told a story that directly contradicted his claims of innocence. On Valentine's Day, during a window of time between 11 in the morning and 12:15 in the afternoon, DeMarcus's phone had been tracked to Greer Road, the exact location where Anitra's body was found. His phone had been in the woods where her body was dumped, standing next to the place where she lay hidden among the branches. Forensic analysis of Anitra's car revealed DeMarcus's fingerprints. His prints were in the automated fingerprint identification system because of his status as a sergeant in the United States Army, making identification certain. The car itself told its own story. It had been driven down that wooded path off Greer Road, scraping against trees and losing parts along the way. Pine straw was stuck in the grille, and the damage to the vehicle matched the notches and marks found on trees along the path where Anitra's body was discovered. In DeMarcus's black Corolla, investigators found a pair of Nike Air Force One sneakers that were wet, with wet socks stuffed inside each shoe. When examined by GBI crime scene specialist Harley Patterson, the shoes were found to have leaves, sticks, pine straw, and mud on them, consistent with having walked through the woods where Anitra was found. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from DeMarcus's own friend, Jivon Abram, who had spent the night of February 13th and the early morning of February 14th at Sherry Tolbert's house with DeMarcus and Anitra, testified that DeMarcus had confessed to him. According to Abram, DeMarcus had told him what happened that Valentine's Day morning. He said he had told Anitra that they were soulmates, that he loved her, and that she had laughed in his face. In response, DeMarcus claimed he had blacked out, and when he came to, Anitra was dead. He told Abram, "I had to get rid of her." In March 2022, more than 2 years after Anitra's death, DeMarcus Little stood trial for her murder in Peach County. The courtroom was filled with Anitra's family members, who had waited so long for this moment, for the chance to see justice served for their beloved daughter, sister, and cousin. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Don Baskin, presented a methodical case built on overwhelming evidence. They called witness after witness, expert after expert, each one adding another piece to the puzzle that formed a clear picture of DeMarcus's guilt. Medical examiner Dr. Andrew Koopmeiners testified about the autopsy findings. He explained to the jury that Anitra had died by manual strangulation, that there were abrasions on her neck showing where hands had pressed against her throat. There was bruising on her face, injuries that had occurred before her death, consistent with being punched or having a hand held over her mouth. On the left side of her neck were crescent-shaped markings that could have been made by Anitra's own fingernails as she desperately tried to remove the hands that were choking the life from her. The testimony was graphic and emotionally devastating. Judge Connie Williford had warned the family that the photographs of Anitra's body would be gruesome, giving them the option to leave the courtroom. But they stayed, bearing witness to what had been done to their loved one, though several family members had to leave at different points when the details became too much to bear. Lieutenant Brian Stewart described the search that led him to Anitra's body, the plastic car part that had been his first clue, the notch on the tree, and the heartbreaking moment when he saw her lying in the woods. Crime scene specialists testified about the evidence collected from DeMarcus's car and shoes, the leaves and mud that connected him to the location where Anitra was found. The jury heard the text messages read aloud, page after page of DeMarcus's threats, his manipulation, his accusations, and his violence. They learned about the slashed tires and the broken windows. They heard Scoot testify about the strange messages he had received from Anitra's phone after she was already dead, messages that DeMarcus had sent trying to create confusion and cover his tracks. And they heard from Jivon Abram, DeMarcus's friend, who testified about the confession DeMarcus had made to him, about how Anitra had laughed when he professed his love, and how he had killed her in response. DeMarcus Little took the stand in his own defense, a risky move that ultimately backfired. When he walked to the witness stand, Anitra's father Christopher left the courtroom, unable to bear hearing the man who had killed his daughter speak. DeMarcus testified that Anitra was his soulmate, his lifeline, that she meant everything to him. He began to cry as he spoke about her. But under cross-examination by Assistant District Attorney Dawn Baskin, the facade crumbled. She asked him directly, "You slashed your soulmate's tires? Broke your soulmate's windows? Told her you tried to kill yourself, and told her it was her fault?" To each question, DeMarcus simply answered, "Yes." He insisted he wasn't a monster, claiming that if he was, Anitra would have left him long ago. But the evidence said otherwise. When asked about the critical hours on Valentine's Day, the window of time when Anitra was killed, DeMarcus said he couldn't remember what he had done. He claimed that all of the GPS data from his phone was correct except for the locations showing him on Greer Road, where Anitra's body was found. When ADA Baskin pointed out that if those GPS locations were accurate, they would show him standing next to his soulmate's body, he simply replied, "No, ma'am." Defense attorney Benjamin Davis argued that the case made no sense, that the state had jumped to conclusions based on text messages. But the evidence was far more than just text messages. It was GPS data, fingerprints, physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and a confession. In her closing statement, ADA Dawn Baskin called DeMarcus's phone the biggest witness against him. She compared the case to a psychological thriller, one where the audience can see what's going to happen long before it does. Using Anitra's own words from her text messages and photographs of the crime scene, she painted a picture for the jury of a young woman who had tried desperately to escape an abusive relationship, only to be killed by the man who claimed to love her. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, they found DeMarcus Little not guilty of malice murder, but guilty of felony murder and aggravated assault. Judge Connie Williford sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum penalty under the law. Anitra Lachey Gunn had overcome so much in her young life. Her mother, Melissa Shearhouse, had died in a car accident in 2014 when Anitra was just 17 years old. On Mother's Day after her mother's death, Anitra had posted a photo of her mother's grave on Facebook with a note that read, "It's not at all the same without you, but I feel your presence. That's all I need." Despite the loss of her mother, Anitra had persevered. She had enrolled at Fort Valley State University, worked hard in her classes, held down a part-time job, and was just months away from graduating with her degree. She was lining up job interviews, celebrating milestones with friends, and planning for a future that should have been bright and full of possibility. But DeMarcus Little took that future away from her on Valentine's Day 2020. In his aunt's house on Chestnut Hill Road, during an argument on a day meant to celebrate love, he strangled the life from the young woman who had tried so hard to escape his control. He told her he loved her, and when she laughed, when she rejected him one final time, he killed her. After Anitra was dead, DeMarcus put her body in the trunk of her own car and drove it down a wooded path in Crawford County. He dumped her in the woods, covering her with branches as if she were nothing more than trash to be hidden away. He took her shoes, her underwear, her wig, leaving her partially clothed and exposed to the elements. Then he used her phone to send misleading messages, trying to create confusion about her whereabouts and buy himself time. For 4 days, while Anitra's father searched desperately for his daughter, while a task force combed the area looking for any sign of her, while friends and family prayed for her safe return, her body lay hidden in those woods. When Lieutenant Brian Stewart finally found her on that rainy morning, bringing an end to the search but confirming everyone's worst fears, it marked the beginning of the long journey toward justice. The verdict and sentence brought a measure of closure to Anitra's family, though no verdict could ever truly heal the wound of losing her. Her cousin spoke to reporters after the sentencing, expressing relief that DeMarcus would spend the rest of his life in prison, that he would never be able to hurt anyone else the way he had hurt Anitra. The case stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and controlling relationships. Anitra had recognized the toxicity of her relationship with DeMarcus. She had told him they should stop speaking. She had tried to create distance, but he wouldn't let her go, and ultimately, his inability to accept rejection cost Anitra her life. The text messages between them, read aloud during the trial, showed clearly that Anitra had been living in fear, trapped in a relationship with someone who threatened her, manipulated her, and eventually killed her. The February 5th incident, when he slashed her tires and broke her windows, should have been a final warning, a clear sign of escalating violence. Instead, it was a prelude to murder. As DeMarcus Little was led from the courtroom to begin serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole, Anitra's family could finally begin to grieve properly, knowing that justice had been served. But they would forever carry the weight of her absence, the knowledge that a bright young woman who had survived the loss of her mother, who had worked so hard to build a future for herself, had been stolen from them by someone who claimed to love her. Anitra Gunn's life mattered. She was more than a victim, more than a headline, more than a case number. She was a daughter who posted loving tributes to her deceased mother. She was a student working toward her degree. She was a server who knew her regular customers. She was a friend who confided her fears and her hopes. She was 23 years old, on the verge of graduation, full of potential and dreams. And on Valentine's Day 2020, all of that was taken away by a man who confused love with possession, who saw her laughter as the ultimate betrayal, and who chose violence over letting her live her own life. The woods off Greer Road where her body was found are quiet now, but they will always be marked by what happened there. And Fort Valley State University, where Anitra should have graduated in 2020, will always remember the student they lost, the life that was cut short, and the painful reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers in the night, but from those who claim to love us most. Story 2. The morning of June 5, 2020, began like any other in the quiet Eagle Landing neighborhood of Hanahan, South Carolina. The streets were peaceful, the air still and heavy with the promise of summer heat. Inside a modest home on one of these tree-lined streets, Caitlin Conrad Speck slept peacefully in her bed, unaware that her life was about to end at the hands of the person who had promised to love and protect her. At approximately 5 o'clock that morning, Matthew Garrett Speck, Caitlin's husband of several years, stood over his sleeping wife with a gun in his hand. The house was quiet except for the soft breathing of Caitlin and the occasional movement of their beloved Labrador retriever, Bailey May, somewhere in the home. In the pre-dawn darkness, Matthew aimed the weapon at his wife and pulled the trigger. The shot shattered the morning silence, and Caitlin's life ended in an instant, without warning, without the chance to defend herself or even understand what was happening. But Matthew's actions that morning did not stop with his wife's murder. After shooting Caitlin while she lay defenseless in bed, he turned his attention to their dog, Bailey May, a gentle Labrador retriever who had been part of their family. The dog, loyal and trusting, met the same fate as her owner. Matthew shot and killed Bailey May, eliminating another innocent life and another potential witness to his crimes. What Matthew did next revealed the calculated nature of his actions. Rather than flee or confess to what he had done, he embarked on a desperate attempt to cover his tracks and create an entirely false narrative. With both Caitlin and Bailey May dead, Matthew turned the gun on himself, but not with the intention of ending his own life. Instead, he carefully inflicted superficial wounds on his own arm and torso, creating injuries that would appear serious enough to support the story he was about to tell. The wounds were strategic, designed to look like the result of an attack, but shallow enough that Matthew would survive. He was crafting evidence, building a scene that would point investigators away from the truth. When he was satisfied with his self-inflicted injuries, Matthew called emergency services, his voice urgent and filled with what seemed like genuine panic. He told the dispatcher that his home had been invaded, that unknown assailants had broken in and attacked his family. He claimed that both he and his wife had been shot by these mysterious intruders, and he needed help immediately. When police and emergency responders arrived at the scene on that early Friday morning, They found what appeared at first glance to support Matthew's story. There was Matthew, wounded and bleeding, seemingly a victim himself. There was Caitlin, dead from a gunshot wound. And there was Bailey May, also shot and killed. The scene looked chaotic and violent, exactly what one might expect from a home invasion gone terribly wrong. But experienced investigators know that crime scenes tell stories of their own, and those stories do not always match what witnesses claim happened. As detectives from the Hanahan Police Department began their careful examination of the scene, inconsistencies emerged. The house showed no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or jimmied locks that would indicate someone had broken in from outside. For a home invasion, this was unusual. The doors had been locked from the inside, suggesting that whoever committed these crimes had access to the home. Another detail caught the attention of investigators. Bailey May was a Labrador Retriever, a breed known for being protective of their families and alert to strangers. If unknown intruders had entered the home, the dog would almost certainly have barked, alerting the neighborhood and creating a commotion. Yet none of the neighbors reported hearing a dog barking in the early morning hours. The house had been quiet until the gunshots, and even then, it was Matthew's call to emergency services that brought attention to the scene. The investigators also noticed something about Matthew's wounds. While they were real and had bled, they were superficial, not the kind of serious injuries one would expect from a violent confrontation with armed home invaders. The placement and depth of the wounds suggested they might have been self-inflicted rather than caused by an attacker trying to kill him. These observations were enough to make the Hanahan Police Department proceed with caution. Rather than accepting Matthew's story at face value, they conducted a thorough investigation, gathering forensic evidence, speaking with neighbors and anyone who might have information, and most importantly, conducting an extensive interview with Matthew himself. Matthew Garrett Speck sat across from detectives for 5 hours, answering questions about the events of that morning. During this lengthy interrogation, investigators carefully listened not just to what Matthew said, but to how he said it, looking for inconsistencies, contradictions, and details that did not align with the physical evidence they had gathered from the crime scene. As the interview progressed, Matthew's story began to unravel. The detectives pressed him on details, asking him to recount events multiple times, looking for variations and gaps in his narrative. They confronted him with the forensic evidence that contradicted his claims. Slowly, the carefully constructed fiction Matthew had created began to fall apart under the weight of scrutiny and scientific analysis. The investigation revealed something even more disturbing than the crime itself. This had not been a spontaneous act of violence, not a moment of rage or passion gone wrong. Matthew had been planning this for some time. When investigators examined his computer and internet search history, they discovered searches that painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Before the murder, Matthew had researched homicidal strangulation, choking death, and cyanide poisoning. These were not the innocent queries of someone watching a crime documentary. They were the research of someone considering how to kill another human being. As investigators dug deeper into Matthew's life, a motive began to emerge. Matthew Speck had been living a double life, maintaining the appearance of a marriage while secretly building a relationship with another woman. He had a girlfriend, someone he had been seeing while still married to Caitlin, and he had been making plans for a future that did not include his wife. The girlfriend's testimony during the trial would prove devastating to Matthew's defense. She told the court that Matthew had discussed divorcing Caitlin and moving away with her to start a new life together. He had painted a picture of freedom, of leaving his current life behind and beginning fresh somewhere else with his new love. But divorce would have been complicated, potentially expensive, and would have required Matthew to face the consequences of his infidelity. In his twisted logic, murder seemed like a simpler solution. Additional testimony from a former co-worker of Matthew's supported this narrative. The co-worker told the court that Matthew had complained about his marriage, expressing dissatisfaction and unhappiness with his relationship with Caitlin. These complaints, combined with his internet searches and his relationship with another woman, painted a picture of a man who saw his wife not as a person he had once loved, but as an obstacle to the life he wanted. The picture that emerged was one of calculated betrayal. Caitlin had gone to sleep that night trusting the man beside her, believing they were building a life together, unaware that he had been planning her death. She had no reason to suspect that the person who should have been her protector had become her executioner. The betrayal was absolute and devastating, made worse by the cold premeditation that preceded it. When Matthew Garrett Speck's case went to trial, it lasted 5 days. Assistant Solicitors F. Alexander Myers and Nicholas Young presented the prosecution's case before a Berkeley County jury, methodically laying out the evidence against Matthew. They called medical experts who testified about the nature of the wounds, both Caitlin's fatal gunshot and Matthew's self-inflicted injuries. Crime scene technicians walked the jury through their findings, explaining how the physical evidence contradicted Matthew's story of a home invasion. The girlfriend took the stand, a difficult and emotional testimony in which she revealed Matthew's plans to divorce Caitlin and start a new life. Her words gave the jury insight into Matthew's state of mind before the murder, showing that he had been actively planning a future without his wife and had discussed those plans with another woman. The testimony was damning, providing a clear motive for murder. The co-worker's testimony about Matthew's complaints regarding his marriage added another layer to the prosecution's case, showing a pattern of dissatisfaction and a desire to escape his current life. And perhaps most damning of all was the evidence of Matthew's internet searches, those dark queries about methods of killing that showed clear premeditation and planning. Throughout the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a man who had methodically planned the murder of his wife, who had researched methods of killing, who had created a cover story complete with self-inflicted wounds, and who had been motivated by a desire to escape his marriage without the complications of divorce. Every piece of evidence, from the forensic analysis to the witness testimony to the internet search history, pointed to Matthew's guilt. The defense had little to counter this overwhelming evidence. Matthew's story of a home invasion had been thoroughly debunked by the physical evidence and the investigation. The lack of forced entry, the silence of the dog, the superficial nature of his wounds, and his own internet searches all contradicted his claims of innocence. The jury deliberated and reached their verdict. They found Matthew Garrett Speck guilty of murder, guilty of ill-treatment of animals for killing Bailey May, and guilty of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. The convictions were unanimous, the evidence too strong to ignore, the planning too obvious to dismiss. When the time came for sentencing, Assistant Solicitor F. Alexander Myers addressed Circuit Court Judge Deidre Jefferson, requesting that Matthew face no less than life in prison. Myers argued that Matthew had earned the harshest possible sentence through his brazen betrayal and clear premeditation. He had not acted in a moment of passion or rage. He had planned his wife's death, researched methods, created an elaborate cover story, and executed his plan with cold calculation. Judge Jefferson listened to the arguments, reviewed the evidence, and considered the nature of the crimes. On that day in November 2024, more than 4 years after Caitlin's death, she delivered her sentence. Matthew Garrett Speck would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge. Additionally, he received 5 years for the ill treatment of an animal charge for killing Bailey May, and 5 years for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. These sentences would run concurrently with the life sentence, meaning Matthew would never walk free again. Speck earned his sentence after his brazen betrayal and premeditation, Assistant Solicitor Myers said after the sentencing. The words captured the essence of the case. This was not a crime of passion or accident, but a deliberate, planned murder committed against a woman who had trusted her husband completely. The Matthew Speck case stands as a stark reminder of how betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. Caitlin Conrad Speck went to bed on the night of June 4th, 2020, in her own home, in her own bed, next to her husband. She had every reason to feel safe. The home invasion story Matthew concocted was designed to suggest that danger had come from outside, from strangers with evil intent. But the truth was far more horrifying. The danger had been lying beside her all along. Bailey May, the loyal Labrador Retriever, met her death trying to be part of Matthew's cover story. Dogs are often said to be humanity's best friend, loyal and trusting to the end. Bailey May's silence that morning, the fact that she had not barked at intruders because there were no intruders, became one of the key clues that unraveled Matthew's lies. She died not defending her family from strangers, but at the hands of someone she knew and trusted. The case also highlighted the importance of thorough police work and forensic investigation. The Hanahan Police Department's careful examination of the crime scene, their attention to inconsistencies, and their methodical gathering of evidence prevented Matthew from getting away with murder. The 5-hour interview, the forensic analysis, and the discovery of his internet searches all contributed to building an airtight case against him. For those who knew Caitlin, her death left a void that could never be filled. She was more than just a victim and a crime statistic. She was a person with hopes, dreams, relationships, and a life that was violently cut short by the person who should have protected her. Her story serves as a reminder that domestic violence can take many forms, and that danger sometimes wears a familiar face. Matthew Garrett Speck's life sentence ensures that he will spend the rest of his days contemplating the choices he made on that June morning. His attempt to escape his marriage through murder instead led to the permanent loss of his freedom. His elaborate staging, his self-inflicted wounds, and his false claims of home invasion all failed in the face of determined investigation and scientific evidence. The case remains a powerful example of how premeditation and planning cannot overcome the truth revealed by careful forensic work and thorough investigation. Matthew's internet searches, his relationship with his girlfriend, his co-workers' testimony about his marital complaints, and the physical evidence at the scene all combined to paint an undeniable picture of guilt. His attempt to create a false narrative was dismantled piece by piece until nothing remained but the truth. He had murdered his wife in cold blood to pursue a new life with another woman. As the doors closed behind Matthew Garrett Speck in prison, they closed on a chapter of calculated cruelty and betrayal. Caitlin Conrad Speck's life ended far too soon, taken by someone she trusted. But through the dedication of law enforcement and the justice system, her killer was held accountable for his actions. The life sentence without parole ensures that Matthew will never have the freedom to hurt anyone else, and that Caitlin's death, while tragic and untimely, did not go unpunished. Story 3. In the spring of 2019, Holly Springs, North Carolina, was a quiet and growing town in Wake County, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other and families raised their children in relative peace and safety. 22-year-old Monica Day Moynan lived there with her 2 young daughters, Nova and Kaylee, in an apartment where she was trying to build a stable life for her small family. She worked as a waitress at a restaurant in nearby Fuquay-Varina, dreaming of becoming a doula and helping other women through childbirth, a goal she researched often and spoke about with enthusiasm to friends and family. But Monica's life was far from the peaceful existence she deserved. She shared her apartment with Brian Sluss, the father of her 2 daughters, a man 22 years her senior who had entered her life when she was barely out of her teenage years. Their relationship had been marked by violence and control from the beginning, a pattern of abuse that Monica had tried desperately to escape, but could never fully break free from. Friends and family knew that Brian was dangerous. Monica's mother, Melanie Tucker, had watched with growing fear as her daughter became entangled with a man who hurt her, controlled her, and refused to let her go. Monica had confided in her best friend Alex Wilson about the worst moments of abuse, describing how Brian had choked her on 2 separate occasions until she saw the lights go out, until she thought she was going to die. Monica had even obtained a protective order against Brian in 2017, and he had been convicted of assaulting her in 2019. Yet somehow they continued living together, bound by their 2 children and by Brian's refusal to accept that Monica wanted to leave. Monica had tried to tell people what was happening. She had shown injuries to a co-worker at the restaurant where she worked, and she had said something that would later feel like a chilling premonition. Her exact words were haunting. "When something happens to me, I don't know what will happen to my kids. Not if something happened, but when. Monica knew she was in danger. She knew that Brian's violence was escalating, but she was trapped between her fear of him and her need to care for her daughters. In April 2019, Monica was making plans to finally become independent, to support herself and her girls without needing to rely on Brian for anything. She was working toward becoming a self-sufficient single mother, researching her career goals, managing her finances, and preparing for a future that didn't include the man who had hurt her so many times. But Brian could see her slipping away from his control, and prosecutors would later argue that Monica's efforts to leave him, her determination to build a life without him, became the reason he decided she had to die. The last time anyone saw Monica Moynihan in person was in early April 2019. After that date, she simply vanished from view, no longer showing up to work at the restaurant, no longer making her regular grocery store purchases, no longer going about the daily routines that had defined her life. But for 3 months, no one in Monica's family realized she was gone, because someone was pretending to be her. From April through June 2019, Monica's family members and friends continued to receive text messages from her phone. The messages seemed normal at first, written in a style that matched Monica's texting patterns well enough that her loved ones didn't immediately suspect anything was wrong. Monica's mother noticed that her daughter had stopped calling her, which was unusual since Monica typically called at least once every 2 weeks. But the texts kept coming, and they addressed family matters, birthday plans, and everyday concerns. In one exchange, Monica texted her sister about her training to become a doula, saying, "It's going great. It's the best thing I've ever done. I love it so much." Another message expressed concern that a lost cat might upset her daughter. The texts were convincing enough that Monica's family didn't panic, though they felt an underlying unease they couldn't quite name. But as the weeks stretched on and Monica never answered phone calls, never appeared on video chats, and never showed up in person for family gatherings, the worry began to grow. In early July 2019, Melanie Tucker received a call that would change everything. The manager of Monica's apartment complex contacted her to express concern about the young woman. The manager told Tucker that she had seen Brian Sluss at the apartment numerous times over the past several months, but she had not seen Monica herself since late March 2019. This information was alarming. Where was Monica, and why hadn't anyone seen her in months if she was supposedly living there and texting her family regularly? Tucker requested a welfare check. When police arrived at the apartment and were unable to determine Monica's whereabouts, she was officially reported missing. The Holly Springs Police Department began an investigation, and they immediately wanted to speak with Brian Sluss, the last person known to have seen Monica alive. When investigators questioned Brian, his story raised immediate suspicions. He told police that he had last seen Monica in June 2019, 2 months after she had actually disappeared. He claimed that Monica had developed an addiction to drugs while working at the restaurant, and that she had run away, abandoning her 2 young daughters without a word. To the officers listening, this explanation seemed implausible. Monica's family and friends knew her as a devoted mother who loved her children deeply. The idea that she would simply run away and leave them behind didn't match who she was. But then Brian admitted something even more troubling. He confessed to investigators that he had been sending text messages from Monica's phone, pretending to be her for months. He claimed he had done this because he didn't know how to tell Monica's mother that her daughter had become addicted to drugs and run away. He said he was trying to spare Melanie Tucker the pain of knowing the truth. Investigators didn't believe him. The timeline didn't add up, and Brian's behavior after Monica's disappearance was deeply suspicious. When detectives dug deeper, they discovered that Monica had not been seen by anyone since early April 2019, not June as Brian had claimed. Evidence also suggested that Monica might have been pregnant at the time of her disappearance, a fact that added another layer of complexity and potential motive to the case. Police obtained a search warrant for the apartment Monica and Brian had shared. What they found there confirmed their worst fears. On the kitchen floor, beneath a children's play mat, investigators discovered evidence of what appeared to be a crime scene cleanup. Kitchen tiles were removed for forensic examination, and testing revealed that a large amount of human blood had been present in the cracks between the tiles. That blood was tested and confirmed to belong to Monica Moynihan. Someone had tried to clean the area with bleach, attempting to erase the evidence of what had happened there, but blood had seeped into places that couldn't be reached with a mop or cleaning solution. From that moment forward, the Holly Springs Police Department began investigating Monica's disappearance as a murder. Brian Sluss was named as a person of interest, as was his ex-wife Jarlyn Sluss, who appeared to have knowledge of Monica's disappearance, but had not come forward to help investigators. As detectives continued their investigation, they uncovered a digital trail that revealed the extent of Brian's deception. After April 6th and 7th, 2019, the dates prosecutors believed Monica was killed, her phone and social media usage changed dramatically. Before those dates, Monica's internet search history showed her looking up information related to her life goals, researching how to become a doula, managing her daily responsibilities. After those dates, the phone was being used to search for pornography sites. Monica's credit cards, which she had used for groceries and necessities, were suddenly being charged for Brian's dating site subscriptions. It was clear that Brian had taken over every aspect of Monica's digital life, using her identity to cover up her absence while simultaneously moving on with his own life as if she had never existed. Bank records and evidence collected from the apartment showed that Brian had been selling Monica's household items on Facebook Marketplace, converting her possessions into cash while maintaining the fiction that she was alive and well. He had been driving her car around town, spending her money, and living in her apartment, all while texting her family and friends from her phone to keep them from asking too many questions. In May 2020, more than a year after Monica vanished, Brian Sluss was finally arrested and charged with her murder. Days later, his ex-wife Jarlyn was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice and accessory to murder after the fact. Authorities determined that Jarlyn had possessed information about Monica's disappearance for months, but had chosen to help cover for Brian instead of assisting the investigation. The case against Brian would take nearly 2 more years to come to trial. In April 2022, Brian Sluss stood before a Wake County jury to answer for what he had done to Monica Moynihan. The trial lasted 3 weeks and brought forth testimony and evidence that painted a devastating picture of abuse, control, violence, and ultimately murder. Prosecutor Melanie Shikita laid out the state's case with precision and emotional clarity. It was about power and control, violence and deceit, she told the jury. She explained that Monica had been making every effort to become self-sufficient, to provide for her 2 beautiful daughters without relying on Brian, and that her efforts to leave the relationship had ultimately led to her death. Melanie Tucker, Monica's mother, took the stand and fought back tears as she testified about her fear for her daughter's safety. She was scared, Tucker said. She thought he was going to choke her. Tucker described the protective order Monica had obtained and how it hadn't been enough to save her from the man who claimed to love her. Monica's best friend Alex Wilson provided some of the most harrowing testimony of the trial. She told the jury about the 2 occasions when Brian had choked Monica until she nearly died. She saw the lights go out, and that's just all she can remember, Wilson testified, her voice conveying the horror of what her friend had endured. She said she almost died. Wilson also testified that Monica had desperately wanted to get away from Brian, a man 2 decades older than her, before she was killed. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence from the apartment, showing the jury photographs of the blood-stained kitchen tiles and explaining how someone had attempted to clean up the crime scene with bleach. They showed the jury Monica's phone records and internet search history, demonstrating how dramatically her digital presence had changed after early April 2019. They presented the credit card statements showing charges for Brian's dating sites, the Facebook Marketplace sales of Monica's belongings, and the elaborate series of text messages Brian had crafted to impersonate Monica for 3 months. And then the jury saw something that made the courtroom gasp in collective horror. Prosecutors played nanny cam footage from Brian's house that showed him violently punching his 4-year-old child. The video demonstrated Brian's capacity for violence even against his own young daughter, showing the jury exactly what kind of man Monica had been living with, what kind of danger she and her children had faced every day. Brian Sluss took the stand in his own defense, a decision that would prove disastrous for him. He testified that he and Monica had a volatile relationship, but insisted they were not together at the time of her disappearance, though they were living in the same apartment. He continued to claim that Monica had left on her own accord and that he had no knowledge of what happened to her. Brian admitted that he had been deceptive both before and after Monica vanished, that he had impersonated her in texts and on social media, but he maintained his innocence regarding her death. The jury didn't believe him. His testimony, combined with the overwhelming physical and digital evidence against him, made it clear that Brian Sluss had killed Monica Moynihan and spent months covering up the crime while pretending she was still alive. On April 27, 2022, after just 1 hour of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The foreman stood and announced, "We, the jury, by unanimous verdict, find the defendant Brian Sluss guilty of first-degree murder involving domestic violence." The courtroom erupted with emotion. Monica's family members, who had waited 3 years for this moment, cheered and embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces as they finally heard the words they had been praying for. Brian Sluss was immediately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His conviction marked a historic moment in North Carolina legal history. Brian was the first person in Wake County to be convicted of murder in a case where the victim's body was never found. More significantly, he was the first person charged and convicted under Brittany's Law, a North Carolina statute that allows defendants to be charged with first-degree murder if they have a previous domestic violence conviction against the same victim. Brittany's Law had been passed in December 2017, inspired by the 2014 murder of 22-year-old Brittany Puryear, who was killed by her boyfriend after 4 years in an abusive relationship. Brittany's parents had fought to change North Carolina's laws after her killer was convicted of only second-degree murder because prosecutors couldn't prove premeditation. The new law created a presumption of premeditation in cases where a defendant had previously been convicted of domestic violence against the victim, making it easier to charge first-degree murder in domestic violence homicides. Because Brian Sluss had been convicted in 2019 of assaulting Monica, and because she had obtained a protective order against him in 2017, prosecutors were able to use Brittany's Law to charge him with first-degree murder even without her body being found. Assistant District Attorney Melanie Shikita spoke after the verdict was announced. "This is definitely justice for Monica, but also for Brittany and her family." After the verdict was read and the sentence imposed, Monica's family was given the opportunity to address the court. Melanie Tucker spoke through tears about the daughter she had lost. "A piece of our family puzzle is gone forever," she said. "I will never get to listen to her, be cozy with her, or talk to her about all the things, literally all the things." He ended the life of a beautiful, strong-willed, independent, super fun, funny and intelligent, yet vulnerable, special young mom. Monica's stepfather Brandon Tucker described the mental agony of knowing what Brian had done to Monica, an agony that caused sleepless nights and left an eternal hole in their hearts. Assistant District Attorney Catherine Pomery spoke outside the courtroom after the trial, expressing both satisfaction with the verdict and regret about what remained undone. "This has been a long time in the making," she said. "The one thing I had always wanted was to be able to bring her body home, and I couldn't do that for them. That is a regret I will always have. But to get this justice today means everything. Monica's body has never been found. Despite extensive searches and investigations, law enforcement has been unable to determine where Brian disposed of her remains after he killed her in the kitchen of their shared apartment while their 2 young daughters slept upstairs. The family still holds hope that one day they will find Monica and be able to bring her home, to lay her to rest properly and have a place where they can be near to her. Monica's 2 daughters, who were just toddlers when their mother was killed, have been adopted by Melanie and Brandon Tucker. They are raising the girls with love and ensuring that Nova and Kaylee know how fantastic their mother was, how much she loved them, and how they were her whole world. The Tuckers are determined that Monica's daughters will grow up knowing that their mother fought hard to build a better life for them, that she loved them more than anything, and that she would never have willingly left them behind. Monica de Moynihan was 22 years old when Brian Sluss killed her in early April 2019. She had her whole life ahead of her, dreams of helping other women through childbirth as a doula, hopes of raising her 2 daughters in safety and love. She had tried to escape the man who hurt her. She had obtained a protective order. She had reported his abuse. She had worked toward independence. But none of it was enough to save her from someone who believed that if he couldn't control her life, he would take it away entirely. The kitchen floor where Monica died, where her blood soaked into the cracks between tiles that Brian tried desperately to clean, became the evidence that ultimately convicted him. The text messages he sent pretending to be her, the elaborate fiction he maintained for 3 months while her family believed she was alive, all became proof of his guilt and his consciousness of guilt. And the law created in another young woman's name, Brittany's Law, became the tool that ensured Brian Sluss would spend the rest of his life in prison for murdering the mother of his children. As Brian was led away to begin his life sentence, Monica's family finally had justice, though it could never fill the void her absence had created. Somewhere, in a location only Brian knows, Monica's remains rest waiting to be found, waiting to be brought home to the family who loves her and the daughters who will grow up knowing that their mother fought for them until the very end. Story 4. The afternoon of November 7th, 1997, should have been like any other quiet day in the Bellush household on Markridge Road in Sarasota, Florida. Sheila Bellush, a 35-year-old mother of 6, was home with her 23-month-old quadruplets, Joey, Timmy, Frankie, and Courtney. The toddlers played nearby as their mother moved through the daily routines of caring for 4 young children, a demanding but joyful responsibility that Sheila had embraced with her whole heart. Her 2 teenage daughters, Stevie and Daryl, were at school, where they spent their weekdays like any other teenagers in suburban Florida. Sheila's husband, Jamie Bellush, a pharmaceutical sales representative and former United States Marine, was at work. The house was peaceful, filled with the sounds of small children at play, the kind of ordinary domestic scene that plays out in countless homes across America every day. But someone was watching. Someone had traveled more than 1,300 miles from Texas to this quiet Sarasota neighborhood, carrying with him a gun, a knife, and instructions that would shatter this family forever. Jose Luis del Toro Jr., a 24-year-old from La Pryor, Texas, had driven across multiple states to find this house, to find Sheila Bellush, and to end her life. Del Toro had entered the home through an unlocked window, slipping inside silently while Sheila tended to her children. For nearly an hour, he watched her, this stranger observing a mother caring for her babies, waiting for the right moment to strike. Later, he would confess that he had been on the verge of leaving, that he didn't want to go through with what he had been paid to do. But then Sheila noticed an open door, something that shouldn't have been open. She looked up, and their eyes met. In that terrible moment, when Sheila realized there was a stranger in her home, Del Toro made his choice. He pulled out a .45 caliber handgun and fired, shooting Sheila in the face at close range. The bullet tore through her, and she fell to the kitchen floor as blood began to pool around her. But Del Toro wasn't finished. He had been paid to make sure she was dead, and wounded as she was, Sheila was still alive, still suffering, her body fighting desperately to survive. Del Toro pulled out a knife and slashed Sheila's throat, cutting deep into the soft tissue of her neck. Blood splattered across the kitchen as Sheila's life drained away. And through it all, her 4 babies were there, watching, too young to understand what was happening but old enough to know something was terribly, horribly wrong. The quadruplets, barely 2 years old, witnessed their mother's murder, standing in the kitchen as the violence unfolded before their innocent eyes. When Del Toro finally left the house, fleeing through the same window he had entered, Sheila Bellush lay dead on her kitchen floor. Her throat had been cut so deeply that it nearly severed her head. Her face bore the terrible wound from the gunshot, and her 4 toddlers, alone now with their mother's body, began to crawl and toddle through the spreading pool of blood, leaving tiny footprints across the floor, on the walls, throughout the house. Several of the children were still wearing the life vests that Sheila had put on them while changing a diaper, a precaution to keep them from wandering to the backyard pool and drowning. A mother's careful attention to safety, even in the most mundane moments, never imagining that the real danger would come from inside the home itself. When 13-year-old Stevie Bellush arrived home from school that afternoon, she walked into a nightmare. She found her mother dead in a massive pool of blood on the kitchen floor, her throat slashed, her face destroyed by a gunshot wound. The 4 quadruplets, covered in their mother's blood, their tiny hands and feet red, were crying and confused, wandering through the carnage, unable to comprehend what had happened. Stevie's screams pierced the quiet neighborhood. With trembling hands, she grabbed the phone, the same phone that bore her mother's bloody handprint, evidence that Sheila had tried in her final moments to call for help, and dialed 911. Through sobs and barely coherent words, she told the dispatcher that her mom was dead, that there was blood everywhere, that her baby brothers and sisters were covered in it. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office responded immediately. Detective Sergeant Chris Iorio and Captain Ron Alberton arrived at the scene and secured what would become one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever encountered. The violence was shocking, excessive, personal. This was not a robbery gone wrong or a burglary interrupted. Someone had come to this house specifically to kill Sheila Bellush, and they had done so with devastating brutality. In the garage, investigators found critical evidence. There was a towel with a bullet hole through it, containing gunshot residue. The killer had likely used it as a makeshift silencer, trying to muffle the sound of the gunshot. The towel had apparently caused the gun to jam, preventing the killer from firing multiple shots and forcing him to resort to the knife to finish the job. On the clothes dryer in the garage, they found a bullet casing, and most importantly, a fingerprint that didn't belong to anyone in the Bellush family. Near Sheila's body in the kitchen lay a broken, bloody knife. Blood on the nearby phone showed where Sheila had desperately tried to call for help before succumbing to her wounds. Every piece of evidence pointed to a calculated, deliberate murder. When Jamie Bellush arrived home and learned what had happened to his wife, he immediately asked for a lawyer. To the detectives, this seemed like an unusual response from an innocent person whose wife had just been murdered. But as they spoke with Jamie, they began to understand why he might be wary of the investigation's direction. He told them about Sheila's ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne, a wealthy businessman from San Antonio, Texas. Jamie explained that Sheila and Blackthorne had been married from 1983 until 1987, and their divorce had been acrimonious and bitter. Blackthorne had been abusive during the marriage, manipulative and controlling, and he had never accepted the terms of their divorce. Sheila had been awarded custody of their 2 daughters, and the legal battles had continued for a decade after their separation. Sheila was also awarded 20% of Blackthorne's multi-million-dollar company, plus $170,000 in civil damages. Blackthorne owed Sheila over $1 million in total and had filed for bankruptcy shortly after. The animosity between Sheila and her ex-husband had been intense and ongoing. Blackthorne had even admitted to others that he had once threatened to kill Sheila because he thought she was a negligent mother, though he claimed the threat was not serious. But despite the bad blood and the financial motive, when detectives checked Blackthorne's whereabouts on the day of the murder, they found he had an alibi. He had been on the golf course at the Oak Hills Country Club in San Antonio when Sheila was killed, more than 1,300 miles away. As news of the brutal murder spread through the community, tips began coming in. A gas station employee near the Bellush home called authorities with a crucial piece of information. On the day of the murder, a man wearing camouflage clothing had come into the station and asked for directions to Markridge Road, the street where the Bellush family lived. The employee had given him a laminated map to help him find his way. When detectives retrieved that map, they were able to lift a fingerprint from its surface. It was the same fingerprint they had found on the clothes dryer in the Bellush garage. The killer had left his prints at both locations, creating a clear trail. Another witness, a landscaper who had been mowing a nearby lawn on the day of the murder, came forward with more information. He had seen a man in the neighborhood who looked out of place, someone who didn't fit the suburban surroundings. The landscaper had been sharp enough to notice the stranger's license plate, and had even created a rhyme to help himself remember the number. When detectives ran that plate, they found it didn't belong to anyone in Florida. But it did match a vehicle registered to Maria del Toro of La Pryor, Texas. On November 9, 1997, just 2 days after the murder, Sarasota detectives traveled to the small Texas town of La Pryor to speak with Maria del Toro. She told them that her grandson, Joey del Toro, was the primary driver of the vehicle. Joey was a popular young man in La Pryor, a star running back on his high school football team, known as a party boy and fun guy, not someone anyone would have suspected of violence or murder. When investigators compared the fingerprints from the crime scene to Joey del Toro's prints, they had a match. Del Toro had definitely been in the Bellush home, and his fingerprints placed him at the scene of Sheila's murder. Detectives traveled to Del Toro's girlfriend's apartment in Austin, Texas, hoping to find him and bring him in for questioning. But he had fled days earlier, leaving behind his car and a duffel bag. Inside that duffel bag, investigators found camouflage clothing that matched what witnesses had described seeing the suspect wear on the day of the murder. And inside Del Toro's car, detectives found receipts for the camouflage attire, directions to Florida, and most damning of all, the .45 caliber pistol that had been used to shoot Sheila Bellush. The physical evidence was overwhelming, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why would Joey del Toro drive from Texas to Florida to murder a woman he had never met? What was his connection to Sheila Bellush? Who had sent him and why? On November 12, 1997, detectives brought in Sammy Gonzalez, del Toro's cousin, for questioning. Gonzalez appeared nervous from the start, and it didn't take long before he began talking. He told detectives that he felt sick about what had happened, that he wanted to get the truth out. Gonzalez explained that his friend Danny Rocha had approached him about a job. Rocha wanted to pay someone thousands of dollars to beat up a woman who lived in San Antonio, Texas. But if the men wanted more than $10,000, Rocha had said, they would have to kill her instead. Gonzalez had initially agreed to do the job himself, but he had gone looking for the victim several times without finding her and had lost interest. That's when he contacted his cousin Joey del Toro to see if he would take the job for less money. Del Toro had agreed. When Rocha learned that the victim was about to move to Florida, he asked if either Gonzalez or del Toro would be willing to go to Florida to complete the job. Rocha told them that his associate would pay a $10,000 bonus if the man could get his daughters back from the victim. At a meeting at the Pan American Club in Texas on November 4, 1997, just 3 days before the murder, Rocha had discussed the plan with del Toro. He offered del Toro $4,000 plus expenses to go to Sarasota, find the victim, and beat her. When del Toro asked whether it would be easier to just shoot the victim, Rocha had responded that yes, whatever was easiest, that's what he should do. On November 7, 1997, del Toro had called Gonzalez and told him to relay to Rocha that the job was done. After the murder, Rocha had paid Gonzalez $3,500 to deliver to del Toro for completing the hit. The investigation had now revealed that Sheila Bellush's murder was a murder for hire, a contract killing arranged through a chain of conspirators. And when detectives looked into Danny Rocha's background and connections, they found the link they had been searching for. Rocha was a gifted golfer who hustled members at the Oak Hills Country Club in San Antonio out of their money. His regular golfing partner was Alan Blackthorne, Sheila's ex-husband. In 1 year alone, Blackthorne had lost $300,000 to Rocha in their golf games. Federal prosecutors would later theorize that Blackthorne had been the one hustling Rocha, deliberately losing money to him to create a debt that Rocha would have to repay. Not in cash, but in the form of a favor. Blackthorne had recognized in Danny Rocha someone who might be willing to carry out his ongoing vendetta against his ex-wife. On November 18, 1997, Mexican authorities apprehended José del Toro in Monterrey, Mexico, where he had fled after killing Sheila. But legal complications would delay his extradition to the United States for nearly 3 years. Meanwhile, detectives arrested both Sammy Gonzalez and Danny Rocha. Gonzalez quickly agreed to a plea deal, testifying against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Danny Rocha rejected the same plea deal and opted to go to trial. His trial began on January 11, 1999. Rocha's defense argued that he had only hired Del Toro to beat Sheila Bellush, not to kill her, and that Del Toro had taken it upon himself to escalate to murder. But Sammy Gonzalez testified against Rocha, telling the jury that Rocha had explicitly told Del Toro to shoot and kill Sheila if it was easier, so they could get the money quicker. The jury found Rocha guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. From his prison cell, Rocha became increasingly angry that he was serving a life sentence while Alan Blackthorne continued to golf and live as a millionaire, free and unpunished. Eventually, Rocha decided to cooperate with federal prosecutors and testify against Blackthorne. Under Texas state law, Blackthorne was protected by the accomplice witness rule, which prohibited a person from being charged based solely on the testimony of someone directly involved in the crime. But federal prosecutors found a way around this obstacle. The Violence Against Women Act of 1994 made it unlawful for a spouse or former spouse to travel in interstate commerce or cause another person to travel in interstate commerce to harm their partner. The law seemed tailor-made for this case. On January 4, 2000, more than 2 years after Sheila's murder, federal agents arrested Alan Blackthorne at the Oak Hills Country Club on charges of interstate conspiracy to commit murder for hire and interstate domestic violence. Alan Blackthorne's trial began in San Antonio on June 5, 2000. The courtroom heard Stevie Bellish's agonizing 911 call from the day she found her mother dead. Jurors saw photographs of the crime scene, including images of the tiny bloody footprints left by the quadruplets as they wandered through their mother's blood for hours before Stevie came home from school. The evidence was designed to show the jury not just that Sheila had been murdered, but the full horror and human cost of what Blackthorne had orchestrated. Prosecutors presented more than 400 pieces of evidence linking Blackthorne to the murder conspiracy. They showed that Blackthorne had hired a private investigator to track Sheila down after she moved to Florida. They played recorded telephone conversations in which Blackthorne, posing as a bookie, had called a bail bond company trying to get Sheila's new address, not knowing the company routinely recorded its calls. A former employee of Blackthorne testified that he had asked her to go to a parking lot in Sarasota where Sheila attended church and follow her home. The evidence showed a pattern of stalking and obsession, of a man who refused to let go of his ex-wife even 10 years after their divorce. Blackthorne's own teenage daughter took the stand, testifying against her father. Blackthorne showed no remorse, even in the face of his daughter's pain and testimony. Danny Rocha also testified, outlining how the terms of the murder for hire had changed from beating Sheila for $10,000 to killing her for more money. Rocha claimed that Blackthorne had offered $50,000 if he could obtain custody of his daughters after Sheila was dead. Alan Blackthorne took the stand in his own defense, claiming that everything he had done was for his children, that he wanted to protect them from what he believed was their mother's negligence. But federal prosecutors demolished this claim, pointing out that Blackthorne had not sent his daughters so much as a birthday card in the 4 years since their mother's murder, that he had made no effort to contact them whatsoever after having their mother killed. While the jury deliberated Blackthorne's fate, José del Toro was finally extradited from Mexico back to Florida. On July 6, 2000, del Toro confessed to killing Sheila Bellush. He told detectives that the words he had received were that it would be better if she was dead, better for Blackthorne and better for del Toro himself. He said he hadn't wanted to do it, and had been about to leave after watching Sheila for nearly an hour. But when she noticed the open door and they made eye contact, he felt he couldn't run. He admitted that if she hadn't noticed him, he would have walked out of the house and never completed the job. The next day, July 7th, 2000, after more than 33 hours of deliberation, the jury found Alan Blackthorne guilty of interstate conspiracy to commit murder for hire and interstate domestic violence. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Jose Del Toro pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed burglary charges in Florida. During his sentencing hearing, Del Toro sang a song in court asking for forgiveness. Circuit Judge Paul Logan gave him 2 consecutive life sentences, the maximum penalty for both charges. The 6 children of Sheila Bellush were left to grow up without their mother. Jamie Bellush eventually moved with the quadruplets to New Jersey, taking them away from the Sarasota home where they had witnessed their mother's murder. The children, who had been just 23 months old when they watched their mother die, would have to carry that trauma with them for the rest of their lives, even if they couldn't fully remember or articulate what they had seen. Stevie and Daryl, Sheila's teenage daughters, had to process the knowledge that their own father had orchestrated their mother's death. After having their mother brutally taken from them, they then had to face the reality that the man who was supposed to love and protect them had been responsible for making them orphans. A court ordered that Alan Blackthorne's assets be given to Sheila Bellush's family, potentially providing millions of dollars to help care for the 6 children he had left motherless. But no amount of money could replace what had been stolen from them, could give them back the mother who had loved them, who had put life vests on her toddlers to keep them safe from the pool, who had been building a new life in Florida away from the man who had terrorized her for a decade. Alan Blackthorne's obsession with control and revenge had consumed him so completely that he was willing to pay strangers to murder the mother of his children. He had tracked Sheila across state lines, hired investigators to find her, and orchestrated an elaborate murder-for-hire conspiracy that stretched from San Antonio to Florida. When she moved away to escape him, when she remarried and had more children, when she tried to build a life beyond his reach, he couldn't accept it. If he couldn't control her, he would destroy her. Sheila Bellush had survived years of abuse during her marriage to Blackthorne. She had endured his manipulation, his violence, his attempts to intimidate and control her. She had fought him in court for custody of their daughters and won. She had been awarded financial compensation for what he had done to her. She had moved to Florida, married a good man who loved her, and welcomed 4 more beautiful children into her life. She had built something new, something better, something that should have been safe. But on November 7th, 1997, in her own kitchen, with her babies watching, a stranger hired by her ex-husband took all of that away. Sheila was 35 years old, a devoted mother, a woman who had fought so hard for her freedom and her safety, only to have it end in the most brutal and senseless way imaginable. The case of Sheila Bellush remains one of the most disturbing murder-for-hire plots in American criminal history, not just because of the violence of the act itself, but because of what it revealed about obsession, control, and the lengths to which some people will go to punish those who dare to escape them. 4 men went to prison for their roles in her death. The hitman who pulled the trigger and wielded the knife, the cousin who connected the hitman to the middleman who facilitated the arrangement, and the ex-husband who orchestrated it all from his golf course in San Antonio, keeping his hands apparently clean while ensuring Sheila would never truly be free of him. And in a small home in Sarasota, 4 toddlers left tiny bloody footprints across the floor, a haunting reminder of the innocent lives forever marked by one man's hatred and another man's willingness to kill for money. Story 5. The morning of February 1st, 2012, broke cold and gray over Anchorage, Alaska, the kind of day where the air bit at exposed skin, and the sun seemed a distant memory. Snow blanketed the city, muffling the sounds of traffic on East Northern Lights Boulevard, where the Home Depot parking lot sat quiet, its rows of cars dusted with frost. Tucked into a corner of the lot was the Common Grounds espresso stand, a small drive-through kiosk with a green awning, and a neon open sign that flickered in the dawn. Inside, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was finishing her shift, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her breath fogging the air as she wiped down the counter. Samantha was a familiar face to regulars, her quick wit and warm laugh a small comfort in the Alaskan winter. She chatted with a customer about the weather, handed over a steaming latte, and checked her phone for a text from her boyfriend, Dwayne. As 8 p.m. approached, she locked the cash register, flipped the sign to closed, and stepped into the night, unaware that a predator waited in the shadows, his plan already in motion. Israel Keyes was a man who moved through life like a ghost, his unassuming exterior masking a darkness that had been growing for decades. Born on January 7, 1978, in Cove, Utah, he was the second of 10 children in a fundamentalist Mormon family. His parents, Heidi and John Keyes, were strict, their lives shaped by a rigid belief system that led them to shun mainstream society. They moved often, settling in remote corners of Washington and Oregon, where Israel and his siblings were homeschooled, cut off from the world beyond their family's compound. As a child, Israel was quiet, observant, his intelligence sharp but his interests troubling. He tortured animals, broke into neighbors' homes, and harbored a fascination with violence that he kept carefully hidden. At 20, he joined the U.S. Army, serving at Fort Lewis, Washington, and later in Egypt, his discipline and marksmanship earning him respect. But beneath the surface, his darkness grew. By 2007, he had settled in Anchorage, running a small construction business, Keyes Construction, and raising a young daughter with his partner, Kimberly. To the world, he was a hard-working father, his life unremarkable. But in secret, he was a predator, his crimes planned with a precision that chilled those who would later uncover them. Samantha Koenig's life was the opposite of Keyes's shadowed existence. Born in Anchorage, she was the youngest of 3, raised by her father, James, a long-haul trucker with a gruff exterior and a heart that melted for his daughter. Samantha was a dreamer, her bedroom walls plastered with sketches of mountains and poetry scrawled in her looping handwriting. She loved her job at Common Grounds, where she memorized customers' orders, chatted about their lives, and saved tips for a car of her own. At 18, she was navigating the cusp of adulthood, her relationship with Dwayne Tortolani, a lanky 19-year-old with a shy smile, a source of joy and teenage drama. They texted constantly, planning to meet that night after her shift. As she locked the kiosk, the snow crunching under her boots, she sent Dwayne a quick message. "Done soon. Meet me at 8:30. But as she stepped into the parking lot, a figure emerged from the darkness. Keyes, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a hood, approached with a .22 caliber Taurus pistol. In moments, Samantha was gone, her life snuffed out in a meticulously planned abduction that would send shockwaves through Anchorage. The next morning, James Koenig woke to a sinking feeling. Samantha hadn't come home, her phone was off, and Dwayne hadn't heard from her since her last text. He drove to the Common Grounds stand, his truck rattling over icy roads, and found the kiosk locked, the snow around it undisturbed except for a single set of footprints leading into the lot. Panic set in, his hands trembling as he dialed the Anchorage Police Department. By noon, detectives were on the scene, their breath visible in the frigid air as they combed the kiosk for clues. Inside, they found Samantha's jacket, her keys still in the lock, and a spilled coffee cup on the counter, its contents frozen to the floor. Surveillance footage from the Home Depot, grainy but clear enough, showed a hooded figure leading Samantha away, her hands bound with zip ties, her head bowed. The city, usually a quiet haven nestled between mountains and sea, buzzed with fear. Flyers with Samantha's face, her dark eyes wide, her smile bright, appeared on every lamppost, every storefront. Volunteers scoured parks, trails, and frozen lakes, their boots crunching through snow, their voices calling her name into the wind. But weeks passed with no sign, only a chilling silence that deepened the community's dread. Keyes, meanwhile, was executing a plan he'd honed over years. Unlike most serial killers, he was not driven by impulse but by calculation, his crimes a dark art form. He had stashed murder kits across the country, watertight buckets buried in remote locations, containing guns, zip ties, duct tape, and cash from bank robberies he'd committed to fund his travels. These kits, hidden in places like Blake Falls Reservoir in Parishville, New York, and Eagle River, Alaska, allowed him to kill without leaving a digital trail, avoiding credit cards or plane tickets that could link him to his victims. Samantha was his latest target, chosen not for who she was but for her vulnerability, alone, at night, in a city he knew like the back of his hand. After abducting her, he took her to his property on West 40th Avenue, a quiet street where his shed and boat sat unassuming in the snow. There, in the darkness of his shed, he raped and strangled her, her life ending before the night was through. But Keyes wasn't done. He posed her body, using fishing line to prop her eyes open, making her appear alive, and stored her in the shed, the sub-zero temperatures preserving her remains like a macabre trophy. Days later, Keyes left Anchorage on a planned vacation, a celebrity cruise to the Caribbean with Kimberly and their daughter. He was calm, even jovial, sipping cocktails under the tropical sun, his laughter blending with the ship's music, while Samantha's body lay frozen in his shed. Back in Anchorage, the investigation intensified. Detective Monique Dahl, a tenacious investigator with a reputation for dogged persistence, led the Anchorage police effort. She pored over the surveillance footage, interviewed regulars at Common Grounds, and traced Samantha's debit card, which began showing activity. Small purchases at gas stations in Anchorage, then ATMs in Arizona and Texas. Keyes, using Samantha's phone, sent texts to Dwayne and James, claiming she was safe but needed time away. "I'm okay, just need space," one read, sent to James on February 7th. The ruse bought him time, but Dahl's team was relentless, cross-referencing bank records with CCTV footage from the lower 48. On February 24th, a ransom note appeared in Connor Park, a small green space in Anchorage. It demanded $30,000, deposited into Samantha's bank account, and included a Polaroid photo of her, her eyes eerily open, holding a newspaper dated February 13th to prove she was alive. James, heartbroken but clinging to hope, rallied the community, raising the money through donations. He deposited it at a local bank, his hands shaking as he handed over the cash, praying it would bring his daughter home. The card was used again, $500 withdrawn in Wilcox, Arizona, then more in Texas. The FBI, now involved, coordinated with local law enforcement, their ViceAP database humming as they searched for patterns. Agent Jolene Godin, a seasoned investigator with a calm demeanor, took lead on the federal side, her instincts honed by years of chasing predators. Keyes' downfall came on March 13, 2012, in Lufkin, Texas. Texas Ranger Steve Rayburn, patrolling a quiet highway, pulled over a white Ford Focus for speeding. The driver, a lean man with short brown hair and a calm demeanor, presented an Alaska driver's license, Israel Keyes. A routine search revealed Samantha's debit card, a black ski mask, and a cell phone linked to the ransom texts. Keyes was arrested, his composure cracking only slightly as he realized the net was tightening. Flown back to Anchorage, he faced hours of interrogation, the FBI's behavioral analysis unit joining Dahl and Godin. Keyes, articulate and eerily composed, played a cat-and-mouse game, offering fragments of truth laced with deflection. After days of pressure, he confessed to Samantha's murder, revealing her body's location in Matanuska Lake, a remote body of water north of Anchorage. Divers, battling the icy currents, recovered her remains on April 2nd, the water's grip preserving the evidence of Keyes' brutality. James, notified at his home, collapsed in grief, his hope shattered, his daughter's sketches now a painful reminder of her absence. But Samantha was only the beginning. Keyes' confessions, delivered in a flat, detached tone, revealed a far darker truth. He claimed responsibility for at least 11 murders, though he named only a few. In June 2011, he had killed Bill and Lorraine Currier, a couple in their 50s, in Essex, Vermont. He broke into their home, abducted them at gunpoint, and drove them to an abandoned farmhouse, where he raped Lorraine and shot Bill before disposing of their bodies in a landfill. In April 2009, he killed an unnamed victim in Tupper Lake, New York, after robbing a bank to fund his travels. His method was chillingly meticulous. He flew to one city, rented a car, drove hundreds of miles, and struck randomly, choosing victims who wouldn't be missed immediately. He studied serial killers like Ted Bundy, learning from their mistakes, and prided himself on his ability to evade capture. "I'm two different people," he told Godin, his voice calm but his eyes cold. "I enjoyed what I did. I have no remorse." The investigation widened, a nationwide effort to connect Keyes to unsolved cases. His travel records, pieced together from airline tickets, hotel reservations, and car rentals, showed a man who crisscrossed the U.S., Washington, New York, Vermont, Utah, Alaska, leaving death in his wake. In April 2009, he stayed at a Hampton Inn in Colchester, Vermont, days after the Currier murders. In July 2010, he rented a Chevy Malibu in Seattle, driving 393 miles, his destination unknown. A cache at Blake Falls Reservoir in New York, uncovered by the FBI, contained a .22 caliber Ruger ammunition and a silencer, evidence of his planning. Another in Eagle River, Alaska, held similar tools of death. The FBI released maps of his movements, pleading for public tips, but many victims remained unidentified, their fates buried in Keyes' cryptic taunts. "There's no one who knows me or who has ever known me who knows anything about me, really," he told investigators, a smirk playing on his lips. The emotional toll on the victims' families was profound. James Koenig, a man who had lived for his daughter, retreated into silence, his days spent staring at Samantha's sketches, her poetry now a painful echo of her voice. Dwayne, only 19, struggled with guilt, wondering if he could have walked her home that night. In Vermont, the Currier family held memorials, their grief compounded by the lack of closure. Bill and Lorraine's bodies were never found, lost in a landfill's vast expanse. Amy Currier, their daughter, spoke at a 2013 vigil, her voice trembling. They were good people taken too soon. Across the country, families of missing persons contacted the FBI, their stories eerily aligned with Keyes' travels. A woman last seen in Spokane, a man missing in Utah, a hiker vanished in New York. The FBI's VICAP database, cross-referencing Keyes' movements with unsolved cases, yielded no definitive matches, but the families clung to hope, their lives suspended in a purgatory of uncertainty. Keyes' time in custody was brief but intense. Held in Anchorage's federal jail, he toyed with investigators, offering just enough to keep them hooked, but withholding key details. He demanded the death penalty, not out of guilt but to control his narrative, to avoid a long trial that might expose more of his secrets. He spoke of his crimes with a chilling pride, describing how he'd burn bodies, sink them in lakes, or leave them in landfills to erase evidence. But on December 2, 2012, he took matters into his own hands. Using a razor blade smuggled into his cell, he slit his wrists and strangled himself with a bedsheet, leaving behind a cryptic note smeared with his blood. The note, analyzed by the FBI, was undeciphered, its words a final taunt. His death silenced the only man who knew the full scope of his crimes, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The aftermath was a reckoning for Anchorage. The city, unaccustomed to such horror, grappled with its vulnerability. The Common Grounds kiosk became a makeshift shrine, flowers and candles piling up in the snow, their flames flickering against the long Alaskan nights. Samantha's funeral, held in April 2012, drew hundreds, the community united in grief. James, speaking to a local reporter, his voice raw, said, "She was my light. I'll never stop looking for answers." The FBI, led by Agent Godin, continued their work, combing through Keyes' caches, his travel logs, his cryptic statements. In August 2013, they released new details, including a map of his movements and a plea for information, hoping to identify his other victims. Posts on X speculated about connections to cases in Washington, New York, even Canada, but no concrete links emerged. The Guardian, in a 2013 article, noted the case's complexity. Keyes' ability to evade detection for over a decade a testament to his cunning. The families of Keyes' known and unknown victims bore the heaviest burden. In Anchorage, James Koenig sold his truck to fund a private investigator, his life consumed by the search for truth. Dwayne, now in his 20s, moved away, unable to face the city where Samantha was taken. In Vermont, Amy Currier planted a garden in her parents' memory, her hands trembling as she worked the soil, each flower a small act of defiance against her grief. Communities touched by Keyes' crimes, Anchorage, Essex, Tupper Lake, held fast to their resilience, organizing fundraisers for missing persons searches, their solidarity a bulwark against despair. By September 2025, the Israel Keyes case remained a labyrinth of unanswered questions. The FBI continued their work, their databases humming with data, their agents chasing shadows across state lines. Keyes' caches, some still undiscovered, haunted the investigation, each one a potential key to a victim's fate. Estimates of his victims ranged from 11 to as many as 30, but without bodies or names, the truth remained elusive. In Anchorage, where the winters were long and the nights unforgiving, the memory of Samantha Koenig and Keyes' other victims lingered, a reminder of a darkness that had passed through, leaving only grief and questions in its wake. For the families, the search for closure was a daily battle, their lives shaped by absence, their hope tempered by the knowledge that some truths might never surface. Yet they pressed on, their love for those lost a light that refused to be extinguished, even in the face of a killer's silence. Story 6. The evening of June 10, 2010, settled over Los Angeles with a heavy stillness, the kind that clung to the palm-lined streets and seeped into the bones of the city's sprawling suburbs. In Lancaster, a desert community on the northern edge of Los Angeles County, the air was warm, carrying the faint scent of creosote and dust. At the Cinnamon Lane Apartments, a modest complex of stucco buildings, 29-year-old Linnell Barsock was living a life on the cusp of transformation. A nurse with dreams of becoming a doctor, Linnell had a magnetic presence. Her laughter was infectious, her ambition boundless. She shared her small apartment with her boyfriend, Louis Bonheur, a Haitian immigrant who worked as a caregiver, and their days were filled with the quiet routines of a couple building a future together. But that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Linnell's life was cut short in a brutal act that would unravel a web of betrayal, jealousy, and deception. Her body was found in her garage, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head, and the investigation that followed would reveal a chilling truth about the people closest to her. Linnell Barsock was born in 1981, a daughter of California's Antelope Valley, where the desert stretched wide and dreams often felt just out of reach. Raised by her mother, Barbara, Linnell grew up with a fierce determination to rise above the challenges of her surroundings. She was a natural caregiver, her empathy evident even as a child when she'd bandage her cousin's scraped knees or comfort a crying friend. By her mid-20s, she had channeled that compassion into a nursing career, working long shifts at a local hospital while studying to become a physician's assistant. Her colleagues admired her dedication, her ability to stay calm under pressure, and her knack for making patients feel seen. She had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, one coworker later recalled. Linnell's life wasn't all work. She loved to dance, her body moving with a grace that turned heads at local clubs. She was stylish, her wardrobe a mix of bold colors and sleek designs, and her smile, wide and genuine, was her signature. Friends called her Nell, a nickname that carried the warmth of their affection. Linnell's personal life, however, was more complicated. Her relationship with Louis Bonheur, a 38-year-old caregiver she'd met through mutual friends, was marked by love but also tension. Louis, with his soft-spoken demeanor and Haitian accent, had come to the United States seeking a better life. He was charming, often cooking traditional Haitian dishes for Linnell, but their relationship was strained by financial pressures and differing ambitions. Linnell's drive to advance her career sometimes clashed with Louis's more modest goals, and their arguments, though rare, could be heated. Still, they shared a home at Cinnamon Lane, a two-bedroom apartment filled with Linnell's vibrant energy. Photos of her family on the walls, medical textbooks stacked on the coffee table, and a small garden she tended with care. On the evening of June 10th, Linnell was home alone, or so it seemed. Louis had left for work earlier that day, his shift at a nearby care facility keeping him away until late. Linnell's routine was predictable. She'd often spend her evenings studying or chatting with friends on the phone. But around 7 p.m., a neighbor heard a sharp sound, like a car backfiring, from the direction of Linnell's apartment. No one thought much of it. The desert was full of noises, from coyotes howling to tires screeching on the highway. It wasn't until the next morning, June 11th, that the horror came to light. Louis returned home around 8 a.m. and found Linnell's body in the garage, slumped on the concrete floor, blood pooling around her head. He called 911, his voice trembling as he told the operator, "My girlfriend, she's dead." I don't know what happened. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived quickly, their sirens cutting through the morning calm. Deputies found Linnell with a single gunshot wound to the back of her head, the bullet fired at close range. The scene was grim, the garage a stark contrast to the life Linnell had lived. Her gardening tools neatly arranged, her car parked nearby, now a silent witness to her death. The investigation began with urgency. Detectives from the Sheriff's Homicide Bureau, led by Sergeant Robert Gray, canvassed the Cinnamon Lane apartments, interviewing neighbors and collecting evidence. The garage showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting the killer was someone Linnell knew. The single bullet wound, delivered with precision, pointed to an execution-style killing, a detail that chilled the investigators. Linnell's phone records showed no unusual activity, but her apartment was meticulously searched. A .45 caliber shell casing was found near her body, and a faint bloodstain on the bathroom floor raised questions. The bathroom appeared clean, almost too clean, as if someone had scrubbed it recently. Detectives also noted a small plastic bag in the garage, placed over Linnell's head, a detail that suggested an attempt to stage the scene or conceal evidence. Louis Bonheur was the first person of interest. As Linnell's live-in boyfriend, he was the closest to the crime, and his demeanor, calm but shaken, drew scrutiny. During questioning, Louis recounted his movements. He'd been at work until 7 a.m., then stopped for coffee before returning home. His alibi was corroborated by his employer, but detectives pressed him on the state of their relationship. Louis admitted to occasional arguments, but insisted he loved Linnell and would never harm her. "She was my everything," he said, his eyes welling with tears. Yet something about his story felt rehearsed, and investigators kept him under watch. They also looked into Linnell's social circle, interviewing friends and co-workers. One name kept surfacing: Linnell Barsock, a 26-year-old woman who shared a striking similarity with Linnell, not just in name, but in appearance and ambition. Linnell, a recent transplant to Lancaster, had become close to Linnell, their friendship blossoming over shared dreams of success in the medical field. Linnell Barsock was an enigma. Born in Oakland, she had moved to Lancaster to escape a troubled past, including a string of failed relationships and financial struggles. She worked as a medical assistant and was studying to become a nurse, mirroring Linnell's path. The two women had met at a community event, their shared name sparking laughter and an instant bond. They spent hours together, discussing their careers, their love lives, and their plans for the future. Linnell was vivacious, with a quick wit and a penchant for drama, but friends noticed a competitive edge in her relationship with Linnell. She wanted what Nell had, one friend later told police. The job, the boyfriend, the life. Linnell's own relationship with a man named Stephen was rocky, and she often confided in Linnell about her frustrations. Detectives learned that Linnell had visited Linnell's apartment frequently, including the day before her death. Her familiarity with the apartment, and with Linnell's routines, made her a person of interest. As the investigation deepened, forensic evidence began to tell a story. The .45 caliber shell casing matched a gun registered to Linnell Barsock, a discovery that shifted the focus. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Linnell's apartment, a small unit a few miles from Cinnamon Lane. There they found cleaning supplies, including bleach, and a pair of gloves with traces of blood. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Linnell. More damning was Linnell's car, a blue sedan parked outside her apartment. Inside, investigators found a small amount of blood in the trunk, also matching Linnell's DNA. Confronted with the evidence, Linnell's story unraveled. She claimed she hadn't seen Linnell in days, but cell phone records placed her near Cinnamon Lane on the evening of June 10th. A neighbor's security camera captured her car pulling into the complex around 6:30 p.m., just before the gunshot was heard. Under intense questioning, Linnell broke. On June 15, 2010, she confessed to killing Linnell Barsock. Her motive was a toxic blend of jealousy and rage. Linnell admitted she envied Linnell's success, her stable relationship with Lewis, and her clear path to a better life. She claimed Linnell had belittled her, mocking her struggles and flaunting her achievements. "She thought she was better than me," Linnell told detectives, her voice cold. On the evening of June 10th, Linnell said she visited Linnell's apartment under the pretense of catching up. An argument erupted, though Linnell's account of what sparked it was vague. She said Linnell had turned her back, and in a moment of fury, Linnell grabbed her .45 caliber handgun and shot her in the head. Panicked, she dragged Linnell's body to the garage, placed a plastic bag over her head to contain the blood, and cleaned the bathroom where the shooting occurred. She then drove home, hiding the gun and scrubbing her car to remove evidence. The confession was chilling, but detectives suspected Linnell wasn't telling the whole truth. The precision of the gunshot and the staging of the scene suggested premeditation, not a spontaneous act. They dug deeper, uncovering text messages between Linnell and Louis Bonheur. The messages, sent in the days leading up to the murder, revealed a flirtation that bordered on obsession. Linnell had sent Louis suggestive photos, and he'd responded with cautious interest. Detectives theorized that Linnell's jealousy extended to Linnell's relationship with Louis, and she may have seen killing Linnell as a way to eliminate her rival. Louis, when confronted, denied any romantic involvement with Linnell, but his evasive answers raised doubts. The prosecution later argued that Linnell's motive was twofold: envy of Linnell's success and a desire to claim Louis for herself. Linnell Barsock was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial, held at the Los Angeles County Superior Court in early 2011, was a spectacle that gripped Lancaster. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney John Lewin, painted Linnell as a calculating killer driven by envy and obsession. They presented the forensic evidence: the blood in her car, the gun, the cleaned bathroom, and Linnell's own confession. Lewin emphasized the betrayal at the heart of the case. Linnell Barsock trusted Linnell, welcomed her into her home, and paid for that trust with her life. The defense, led by Public Defender Maria Alvarez, argued that Linnell acted in a moment of emotional distress, provoked by Linnell's alleged taunts. They portrayed Linnell as a woman struggling with mental health issues, her life unraveling under the weight of comparison to Linnell. "This was not a planned murder," Alvarez told the jury. "It was a tragic moment of weakness." The courtroom was a crucible of emotion. Barbara, Linnell's mother, sat in the front row, her face etched with grief. She clutched a photo of Linnell, taken at her nursing school graduation, her daughter's smile a painful reminder of what was lost. Louis testified, his voice breaking as he described finding Linnell's body. The jury, a mix of Lancaster residents, listened intently as forensic experts detailed the evidence. The bloodstains, the shell casing, and the security footage were undeniable, but Linnell's tearful testimony, claiming she snapped under pressure, swayed some jurors. After 3 days of deliberation, on March 15, 2011, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. The decision was a compromise, reflecting the jury's belief that Linnell's actions were intentional, but not fully premeditated. She was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. The verdict brought little comfort to Linnell's family. Barbara spoke outside the courthouse, her voice steady despite her pain. My daughter was a light in this world. She wanted to heal people, to make a difference. That woman took her from us, and no sentence can bring her back. Friends and co-workers organized a vigil at Cinnamon Lane, lighting candles and sharing stories of Linnell's kindness. The Antelope Valley mourned, its tight-knit community shaken by the loss of one of its own. Lewis moved away, unable to stay in the apartment where Linnell died. Rumors swirled that he'd known more about Linnell's feelings than he admitted, but no charges were ever filed against him. Linnell Barsock's conviction did little to quell the questions that lingered. Why had she turned on her friend so violently? Was it truly jealousy, or was there a deeper darkness at play? Her prison letters, later obtained by a local reporter, revealed a woman grappling with regret, but also defiance. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she wrote, "but Nell pushed me too far." The case became a cautionary tale in Lancaster, a reminder of how envy could fester into something deadly. Community leaders called for better mental health resources, pointing to Linnell's untreated struggles as a factor in the tragedy. In the years since, Linnell's memory endures. Barbara established a scholarship in her daughter's name, supporting aspiring nurses in the Antelope Valley. The Cinnamon Lane apartments, once a place of tragedy, have been renovated, but residents still speak of Linnell in hushed tones, her story a ghost that lingers. Linnell remains in prison, her parole hearings a point of contention for Linnell's family, who attend each one to ensure she serves her full sentence. The case, though faded from headlines, remains a wound for those who knew Linnell, a reminder of a life cut short, a dream unfulfilled, and a community forever changed by the cost of betrayal. Story 7. In the ancient city of Kyoto, where cherry blossoms painted the spring air and temple bells echoed through narrow streets, the summer of 2019 was warm and vibrant. The city, Japan's cultural heart, thrived on a delicate balance of tradition and modernity, its streets bustling with tourists, students, and artisans. In the Fushimi Ward, a quiet neighborhood of modest homes and small businesses, Kyoto Animation's #1 studio stood as a beacon of creativity. Known as KyoAni, the studio was a beloved institution, crafting anime that captured hearts worldwide with stories of friendship, love, and resilience. Its employees, a tight-knit group of artists and dreamers, worked in a 3-story building filled with sketches, storyboards, and the hum of creative energy. But on July 18, 2019, a man named Shinji Aoba would shatter this sanctuary, unleashing a tragedy that would claim 36 lives, injure dozens, and leave a nation grappling with grief. This is the story of the Kyoto Animation arson case, a tale of delusion, destruction, and the enduring strength of those left to pick up the pieces. Shinji Aoba was a man adrift, a 41-year-old loner whose life had been a series of false starts and bitter disappointments. Born in 1978 in Saitama Prefecture, north of Tokyo, he grew up in a world that seemed to offer little kindness. His childhood was marked by instability, his parents' divorce, a fractured family, and a sense of being unmoored. As a young man, he dreamed of becoming a novelist, pouring his hopes into stories he believed could change his life. But rejection followed him like a shadow. He drifted from job to job, contract work, menial tasks, never finding a place to belong. His apartments, often cramped and cluttered, were temporary shelters in a life of constant upheaval. Neighbors described him as a troublemaker, quick to argue, his voice sharp with frustration. By 2019, he was unemployed, scraping by on the edges of society, his mind a tangle of resentment and delusion. Aoba's obsession with Kyoto Animation began years earlier, in 2017, when he submitted 2 novels to the studio's annual writing contest, a prestigious competition that offered aspiring writers a chance to see their work adapted into anime. KyoAni was known for its integrity, its judges carefully reviewing each submission, but Aoba's novels didn't make the cut. To him, this was no mere rejection, it was theft. In his mind, a conspiracy took root. KyoAni had stolen his ideas, plagiarized his work, and mocked his dreams. He fixated on this belief, his thoughts spiraling into a dark fantasy where a shadowy figure controlled the studio, orchestrating his failure. The delusion grew, fueled by years of isolation and failure, until it became a compulsion to act, to make Kyoani pay for the slight he imagined. On the morning of July 18, 2019, the air in Kyoto was heavy with summer heat. At Kyoto Animation's #1 studio, about 70 employees were at work, their desks scattered with pencils, monitors, and half-finished drawings. The studio was a hive of activity, its 3 floors alive with the creative pulse of animators, writers, and directors. Naomi Ishida, a 49-year-old artist, was among them, her hands deftly sketching characters for an upcoming project. She had worked at KyoAni for years, her passion for storytelling matched only by her love for her colleagues. The studio was more than a workplace. It was a family, a place where dreams were woven into art. Outside, the streets of Fushimi Ward were quiet, the neighborhood unaware of the storm about to descend. Aoba had spent weeks planning his attack. He studied past arson cases, learning how fire could consume quickly, how gasoline could amplify destruction. In Japan, gasoline sales were tightly regulated, but Aoba was meticulous, purchasing 40 liters in 2 metal cans, claiming it was for a generator. He scouted the studio, noting its single entrance, its spiral staircase, its compact 7,500 square foot structure. A perfect trap. A month earlier, he had plotted a separate attack on a train station in Saitama, but abandoned it, his focus narrowing to KyoAni. On July 16th, a resident in Uji near Kyoto spotted him, a lanky figure with a cap pulled low, pacing near the studio. 2 days later, he was ready. At 10:31 a.m., Aoba approached the studio's entrance, his heart pounding, his hands clutching the cans of gasoline. He wore a red t-shirt, his face set with a grim determination. He knocked on the door, and when an employee answered, he pushed inside, splashing gasoline across the floor, the walls, the people nearby. "You die!" he screamed, his voice raw with rage, as he ignited a lighter. The fire erupted instantly, a roaring beast that swallowed the entrance and raced upward. The employees, caught off guard, scrambled for safety, but the single exit was engulfed, the spiral staircase a death trap. Black smoke billowed, and the heat was unbearable, a suffocating force that drove many to the upper floors, where they were trapped. Naomi Ishida was on the 2nd floor when the fire began. She heard shouts, smelled the acrid stench of burning fuel, and saw a black cloud rising from below. Her heart raced as she ran toward the staircase, but the flames were too fierce. Colleagues around her panicked, some jumping from windows, others collapsing from smoke inhalation. Naomi, desperate, tried to reach the roof, but the spiral staircase was a funnel of fire and smoke. She fell, overcome by carbon monoxide, her body one of many found later on those stairs, a silent testament to the desperate fight for survival. Outside, a woman watched in horror as an employee leapt from a 2nd-floor window, his body crashing to the ground, the fire too strong to allow rescue. "It was like hell," she told reporters, her voice trembling. The fire department arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the morning air, but the blaze was relentless. Firefighters battled the flames, their hoses arcing water into the inferno, but the studio was a lost cause. The 3-story building, once a haven of creativity, was reduced to a charred skeleton. 36 people died, many from carbon monoxide poisoning, their bodies found huddled together, as if seeking comfort in their final moments. 32 others were injured, some with burns so severe they would carry scars for life. Aoba himself was badly burned, his body covered in flames as he fled the scene. He collapsed nearby, his skin blistered, his consciousness fading. Police arrested him, but he was too injured to be questioned. His body rushed to a hospital, where he would spend the next 10 months fighting for his life. The news of the attack spread like wildfire, shocking Japan and the world. Kyoto Animation was a cultural treasure, its works like K-On! And a silent voice beloved for their emotional depth. The loss of 36 lives, artists, writers, dreamers, was a blow to the global anime community. Fans gathered outside the studio, laying flowers and handwritten notes, their tears mixing with the ash that still lingered in the air. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed his condolences, calling the attack gut-wrenching. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi announced tighter restrictions on gasoline sales, a direct response to the tragedy. The nation mourned, but for the families of the victims, the grief was raw and personal. Naomi Ishida's mother, speaking to the Mainichi Shimbun, wept as she said, "I should have told her not to go to work that morning. Even if he gets the death penalty, Naomi won't come back." The investigation was meticulous, led by Detective Hiroshi Tanaka, a veteran of the Kyoto Prefectural Police. Tanaka was in his 50s, his hair graying, his eyes heavy with the weight of cases that had marked his career. The Kyoani attack was different, though, a crime of unprecedented scale, the deadliest mass murder in Japan's post-war history. The National Police Agency confirmed it surpassed even the 2001 Kabukicho fire in Tokyo, which killed 44. Tanaka's team combed through the wreckage, collecting fragments of evidence. The gasoline cans, the lighter, the charred remains of the studio. They interviewed survivors, their voices choked with trauma, and pieced together Aoba's movements. The CCTV footage from Uji, grainy but unmistakable, showed him near the studio days before the attack, his intent clear. Aoba's recovery was slow, his body ravaged by burns covering 90% of his skin. He underwent 12 operations, his survival a testament to the skill of his doctors, though one, reflecting later to the Asahi Shimbun, wondered about the meaning of saving a life that had caused such devastation. Aoba was unconscious for weeks, his condition so critical that police could not arrest him until May 27, 2020, when he was wheeled into the Fushimi police station on a stretcher. His interrogation began only after a psychological evaluation, a process that took months. The question of his mental state loomed large. Aoba claimed he had been consumed by delusions for over a decade, believing KyoAni had plagiarized his work. He spoke of a shadowy figure directing the studio's actions, a fantasy that had driven him to kill. But the prosecution was skeptical, pointing to his meticulous planning, his study of arson cases, his purchase of gasoline, all signs of a man who knew right from wrong. The trial began on September 5, 2023, in the Kyoto District Court, a somber space filled with the weight of loss. The courtroom was packed, family members of the victims sitting in silent rows, their faces etched with pain. Aoba, now 45, appeared in a wheelchair, his body frail but his eyes alert. He faced 5 charges: murder, attempted murder, arson, and related crimes. The prosecution, led by a determined young lawyer named Keiko Yamada, argued that Aoba was fully culpable, his delusions a convenient excuse. They presented evidence of his premeditation: the gasoline cans, the scouted location, the abandoned train station plan. He selected the method of the crime based on his own thoughts and knowledge. Judge Keisuke Masuda said, his voice steady as he rejected claims of insanity or diminished capacity. The defense, led by Murat Asherov, countered that Aoba's mental state was compromised, his actions driven by a decade-long delusion that eroded his ability to control himself. They pleaded for leniency, even acquittal, but their arguments faltered against the weight of the evidence. The trial was a public spectacle, with lines forming for tickets to the hearings. About 80 people, including survivors and victims' families, gave statements, their words a tapestry of grief and resilience. 19 of the 36 victims' names were withheld, a gesture of respect for their families' privacy, but their stories were told. Naomi Ishida, who dreamed of directing her own anime, a young animator who had just joined KyoAni, a writer who left behind a notebook of unfinished stories. One family member, a father whose son died, spoke of Aoba's lack of remorse, his self-centered justifications. But in a later interview with the Asahi Shimbun, he softened, moved by Aoba's claim that he wanted to speak out to prevent future crimes. "There are words only he can express," the father said, his voice heavy with conflicted hope. On January 25, 2024, the court delivered its verdict. Judge Masuda, his tone grave, sentenced Aoba to death by hanging, a punishment reserved for Japan's most heinous crimes. The courtroom was silent, save for a single sob from a family member. Aoba, his face unreadable, said little, but later told the Asahi Shimbun, "I seriously accept the verdict." He admitted to feeling shock at the sentence, but insisted he wanted to appeal. Not to escape punishment, but to speak more about his crime, to leave lessons for others. The prosecution had sought the death penalty, and the court agreed, citing the indescribable pain inflicted on the victims and their families. The attack, Masuda said, had turned the studio into hell, a phrase that echoed in news reports across Japan. The defense filed an appeal with the Osaka High Court, arguing that the Kyoto court had misjudged Aoba's mental state and questioning the constitutionality of the death penalty. But on January 27, 2025, Aoba overruled his lawyers, withdrawing the appeal himself. The decision stunned the court, finalizing his death sentence. His lawyer, Asherov, attempted to nullify the withdrawal, but as of early 2025, no further action had been taken. Japan's death row, with 107 inmates as of December 2024, operated in secrecy, prisoners informed of their execution only hours before. Aoba's fate was sealed, though the date of his hanging remained unknown, a shadow hanging over his final days. For the survivors and families, the verdict brought little closure. Kyoto Animation released a statement, their words laced with pain. "There is not the slightest change in the chagrin we feel. Our souls feel nothing but pain." The studio, rebuilt in a new location, continued its work, a testament to its resilience. Fans worldwide raised millions to support Kyoani's recovery, their love for the studio undimmed. Detective Tanaka, nearing retirement, visited the site of the old studio, now a vacant lot, and laid a flower where the entrance once stood. He thought of Naomi Ishida, of the 36 lives lost, and of the justice that had come too late to heal. Kyoto, with its temples and rivers, carried on, but the scars of July 18, 2019, remained, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the enduring power of art to mend broken hearts.